cannot solve the crises of privatization with more privatization. And it is very likely that this is going to make the problem worse, not better. Let's rewind to the 1990s, where the World Bank and IMF pushed Pakistan, as they did many other countries across the global south, to adopt a set of policies that were designed to attract and incentivize private sector investment into the electricity sector using power purchase agreements, or PPAs as they're called, as well as generous tax incentives. PPAs were denominated in US dollars. They provided a two-tier tariff structure where companies were compensated in terms of energy payments on a cost-plus basis, meaning that they were compensated for all energy that was provided to the grid, plus a margin, and they were compensated for capacity that was provided to the grid. So they received energy when they received payment when they were not generating energy at the same time as receiving payment when they were generating energy. The outcome of this in Pakistan has been that electricity generation has become increasingly disconnected from the actual delivery of electricity. In the decade to 2024, Pakistan grid-connected electricity increased, or the capacity to generate increased by 86%. That was shared pretty equally between the private sector and the public sector. However, the actual amount of generation that was delivered to the grid over that same period increased by only 31%. And if you look at this graph here, you can see that the red bar at the bottom, which was public electricity, has done almost all the work in increasing generation, while the private sector generation, which is the grey bar at the top, has stayed pretty much flat for the entire last decade, despite trillions of rupees of new investment going into new generating capacity. What's even more concerning is that per capita consumption of grid electricity has actually declined over this period. Today, public-owned generators deliver around about 2/3 of all electricity, grid electricity, that's consumed. And it is WAPTA that is the real workforce in terms of generating electricity, responsible for more than a quarter of all electricity that is generated today, delivering that electricity for a fraction of the cost of IPP electricity in general. Over the last 8 years, almost half of all payments to independent power producers, 8 trillion rupees out of 16.5 trillion rupees, has been for capacity payments, paying generators while they're not generating electricity. This became particularly pronounced between the years 2021 and 2024, when payments to IPPs increased by more than 120%, driven by rising fuel costs and the devaluation of the Pakistani rupee. In the last 2 years, capacity payments have accounted for more than 60% of payments to independent power producers. So more than 60% in the past 2 years has been compensating IPPs not to generate electricity. In the 2025 financial year alone, capacity payments have totaled 1.8 trillion Pakistani rupees. This has the effect of pushing up consumer tariffs over time, and where the revenue that is collected falls short, that gap accumulates as circular debt, a liability that's ultimately paid for either by government borrowing, by subsidies, or clawed back through surcharges in consumer bills. Blame for the circular debt crisis is often leveled at the distribution companies, but the surging cost of capacity payment has been the real driver of the inability of some distribution companies to collect revenue, and that is pulling money out of health, out of education, and out of other core public services. In the report, we tried to use firm-level company data to try and get an idea of who really benefits from this system. Hubco is the largest IPP. It has interests across 6 different projects. It's the oldest IPP as well. And we documented that over the 6 years to 2024, Hubco experienced a more than 500% increase in net profits after tax. This was particularly pronounced in the year 2023, when Hubco's profit doubled at the same time that the amount of electricity that they delivered to the grid dropped by 50%. As a result of this, the real cost of electricity, or sorry, the profit per unit increased by 4 times in a single year. At Sahiwal IPP, they experienced, which is a Chinese-owned, Chinese-backed project, from the years 2022 to 2024, they experienced a 70% decline in the amount of electricity that was delivered to the grid, while the amount of revenue paid to Sahiwal hardly moved at all. And as a result of that, they experienced a 445% increase in net profit, so profit after tax, in the last 5 years. It's almost the same to say net profit, so after tax profit and pre-tax profit, because of the tax incentives that were given to these companies. And Sahiwal, as an example, encountered a tax rate over this period of between 1% and 5%, next to nothing. And the next projects that we looked at quite a few projects, but Port Chasm is another important example where the amount of electricity that Port Chasm delivered to the grid declined by 91% over a 4-year period. And as a result of that, the real average cost of electricity by the grid purchaser increased by more than 1,000% to roughly 50 times the cost paid to Wapta electricity when purchased from the grid. Those kinds of returns are now locked in under the PPA system for years to come until these agreements expire. The government has done its best to try and renegotiate some of the older contracts, which have already delivered pretty generous returns to companies. But many of these contracts are going to last well into the 2040s, and that will create a long-term fiscal liability for Pakistan. There's nothing illegal or amoral about what's being done here. This is just a rational response by the companies to the policy incentives that are in place at the moment. Consumers have also acted very rationally. The main response from consumers, particularly those with the means to do so, has been to leave the grid altogether, to put rooftop solar on. But the long-term impact of this is pretty challenging. The rooftop solar boom has been very widely documented in the media, but in international media rather. But most of that coverage has missed the crucial context of the system of capacity payments that has pushed people through rising tariffs off the grid, as well as the impact that departure from the grid is having on the poorest consumers. The households and businesses that can afford to leave the grid will do so, but those who cannot, the poorest consumers in the country, are stuck servicing the long-term costs of the PPAs that are in place. They will carry the grid in the long term, the poorest consumers in the country. This process, where a shrinking base of consumers has to service the existing cost structure, is what's called the utility death spiral. This is exactly what an unmanaged transition looks like. And I'm concerned that privatization of the distribution sector is going to throw further fuel on this fire. As Pakistan transitions to an increasingly distributed network of generators, consumers, and also of storage, the importance of the distribution sector will grow as two-way transfers of electricity become the norm, and the need for long-term considered investment is going to become absolutely crucial. So I just want to end by making 3 points. Privatization in the generation sector has led to a huge increase in the cost of electricity, a huge increase in profits for the companies, but it has failed to improve living standards and in fact has probably made it substantially worse. The crisis of privatization cannot be solved with further privatization in the distribution sector. The profits of privatized distribution will have to be paid by somewhere, and that's likely to be paid by carving out returns from labor, or it could be from rising tariffs. And finally, the rooftop solar revolution that is taking place in this country, which is a crucial transition and a very valuable one, will rely increasingly on having a public distribution sector to ensure that the benefits of that transition are shared in a just and equitable way with all the country, not only the consumers that can afford it. Thank you.